My friends. Something that hasn't been talked about enough, but probably should be, is a unit that quietly played a bigger role in the Detroit Lions season than most fans realize: special teams. When you look back at a 9-8 finish, it's easy to point fingers at the offensive line struggles, injuries like the absence of Frank Ragnow, inconsistencies in the run game late in the year, or even defensive lapses in key moments. All of that matters. But buried underneath those bigger storylines is a special teams group that was far more impactful and complicated than it seemed on the surface. Early in the season, the warning signs were already there. Even going back to the preseason, there were some questionable experiments. Using Grant Stewart, a linebacker, as a return man raised eyebrows immediately. That's not a typical move in the NFL. Return duties are usually reserved for wide receivers or running backs with elite agility and vision. And right out of the gate, it didn't go smoothly. A fumble on the very first preseason opportunity set a tone that, in hindsight, felt like a preview of the inconsistencies to come, and those inconsistencies showed up when it mattered. The return game, especially on kickoffs, often felt non-existent. There were moments, like the opener in Green Bay, where the unit looked disorganized, lacking explosiveness and reliability. Coverage units had their struggles too, occasionally giving up field position that put the defense in difficult spots. It wasn't catastrophic every week, but it was uneven enough to be noticeable. Here's where it gets interesting though. When you step back and look at the full season numbers, the Lions actually finished 13th in the league in special teams rankings. That puts them in the top half of the NFL, and notably ahead of every other team in their division. It's a reminder that even with visible flaws, the unit still produced solid results overall. Breaking it down further, there are some clear strengths. The punting game was elite. Jack Fox continues to be one of the most valuable and underrated players on the roster. Ranking 9th in net punting, he consistently flipped field position, pinned opponents deep, and gave the defense an edge. In tight games, that kind of weapon matters more than most people realize. At long snapper, Hogan Hatton delivered quiet consistency. No bad snaps, no drama. Exactly what you want from that position. It's the kind of reliability that often goes unnoticed until something goes wrong, and for the Lions, it simply didn't. Jake Bates, however, is where things get a bit more complicated. He showed promise, especially with his leg strength, but the numbers tell a story of regression. Going 27 of 34 on field goals means 7 misses, compared to just 3 misses the previous season. That drop in efficiency is significant, especially for a team trying to win close games. On the positive side, his extra point accuracy improved, and he still demonstrated range, hitting from 50+ yards when needed. The Lions are betting on a bounce-back year, especially after bringing him back on a 1-year deal. The return game is where the biggest questions now exist. With Khalif Raymond no longer in the picture, there's a clear void. He wasn't just productive, he was dependable, and those are hard shoes to fill. Names like Tom Kennedy showed flashes, particularly on special occasions like Thanksgiving, but there was no consistent answer throughout the season. Looking ahead, there are intriguing possibilities. Jameson Williams is a name that stands out immediately. His elite speed and open field ability make him a natural candidate for kick returns, even if the team has been cautious about using him in that role. There's also the potential involvement of a player like Isaiah Pacheco, whose aggressive running style could translate well to both punt and kick returns if he's fully healthy. And that's really the key word here: health and consistency. Because while the core pieces of the special teams unit are returning, the roles around them are likely to shift. Coverage units will have new faces, return responsibilities will change, and the Lions will need to find a way to turn what was an inconsistent group into a true strength. The reality is this: special teams didn't lose the season for the Lions, but it also didn't consistently elevate them when they needed it most. In a league where field position and hidden yardage can decide games, that margin matters. So now the question becomes, if this group takes a step forward, especially in the return game and field goal consistency, could that be one of the underrated factors that pushes this team back into true contention? What do you think? Did special teams hold the Lions back more than people realize? Or is it being overlooked as a potential strength going into next season? And that's where this conversation starts to connect with everything else the Lions are trying to build moving forward. Because while special teams might not dominate headlines, roster decisions absolutely do, and we're starting to see subtle signals about what this front office is prioritizing next. One of those signals came quietly, without a big big announcement or major buzz, but it matters. The Lions brought in defensive tackle Caleb Banks for a pre-draft visit at Allen Park, and if you've been paying attention to how this front office operates, you already know these visits are rarely random. They are calculated, intentional, and often point directly at positions of need. Now think about the current state of the defensive line. Yes, Aleem McNeil is there. Yes, there are other pieces like Levi Onwuzurike and recent additions who can contribute. But the reality is the interior still feels like an area that could use more depth, more power, and more consistency, especially against the run. That's been a recurring issue, and it showed up in key games last season. Caleb Banks fits that mold physically. He's a big presence inside, someone who has already shown he can be disruptive. 2 years ago, he put together a strong season with 4.5 sacks and multiple tackles for loss, proving he's not just a space eater, but someone who can actually make plays behind the line of scrimmage. And when he was healthy, he was solid against the run, which is exactly what this defense needs more of. But here's the concern, and it's a big one: injuries. Last season, he barely saw the field, appearing in just a handful of games due to a broken foot. And even after an impressive Senior Bowl performance where he dominated, he suffered another foot injury during the combine process. That kind of pattern raises questions, and you know this front office will dig deep into medical evaluations before making any decision. Still, the fact that he was brought in tells you something. The Lions are actively exploring ways to reinforce the interior of the defensive line. They understand that in today's NFL, you can never have too many capable linemen rotating in. Look at teams like Seattle or New England in recent years. Depth on the defensive front isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And when you tie that back to everything else we've discussed, it starts to form a bigger picture. This team isn't just looking for flashy moves or headline signings. They're trying to build a complete roster, one where every phase of the game, including special teams, is stable and capable of winning matchups. That also explains why some fans might feel underwhelmed by free agency. There hasn't been that massive splash, that headline-grabbing move that instantly changes expectations. But if you listen closely to the messaging coming from inside the organization, especially from Brad Holmes, there's a clear emphasis on sustainability, financial discipline, smart roster construction, not chasing short-term excitement at the cost of long-term success. And that approach isn't always exciting in the moment, but it's often what separates good teams from consistently great ones. So now everything starts pointing toward the draft. That's where the next big step happens. That's where needs get addressed, depth gets built, and future starters are found. Whether it's the defensive line, the offensive line, or even adding more explosiveness to special teams through a return specialist, the Lions have an opportunity to shape the identity of this roster moving forward. And don't forget, this team already has a foundation. They're not starting from scratch. They're refining, adjusting, and trying to fix the small details that kept them from going further last season. Because sometimes it's not about making massive changes. Sometimes it's about correcting the margins, improving field position, finishing drives, tightening up coverage, hitting key kicks. All those small things that over the course of a season become the difference between just competing and actually winning the division. So as all these pieces come together, from special teams consistency to defensive line depth to draft strategy, it leads to a bigger picture about where this team is heading. Because the truth is, when you really step back and connect all these dots, you start to realize that what the Lions are doing right now isn't accidental. It's a very deliberate attempt to build something that doesn't just spike for one season, but sustain success over time. And that's why even the smaller conversations like special teams, depth signings, or pre-draft visits actually matter more than they seem. Take the return game again for a second. If the Lions find the right combination there, whether it's giving Jameson Williams a chance in space, or leaning on a more physical option like Isaiah Pacheco if he's fully healthy, that alone can change field position by 10 to 15 yards consistently. Over the course of a game, that's massive. Over a season, it's the difference between average and elite. Now pair that with a bounce back year from Jake Bates. If he returns closer to his earlier form and cuts down those missed field goals, suddenly those close losses start flipping the other way. That's not theory, that's real, tangible impact. Then add in what a reinforced defensive interior could do. If someone like Caleb Banks or another similar presence comes in and helps solidify the run defense, you're talking about fewer second and short situations for opponents, more third and longs, and more opportunities for the pass rush to actually take over games. And that's where everything starts to connect. connect, because when your defense gets off the field faster, your offense gets more possessions. When your special teams win field position, your offense starts closer to scoring range. When your kicker is reliable, drives don't feel wasted. It's all part of the same ecosystem. That's how good teams become complete teams. And maybe that's been the missing piece. Not talent, because this roster has talent. Not coaching effort, because we've seen adjustments even mid-season, but consistency across all three phases at the same time. Last season, it felt like something was always just slightly off. Some weeks it was the offense. Other weeks the defense couldn't hold up. And then there were those moments where special teams quietly put the team in a hole without it being the main headline. Fix those margins and everything changes. And that's why this offseason feels different, even if it doesn't look dramatic on the surface. It's not about one big move. It's about tightening every area just enough so that when December football arrives, this team isn't fighting to stay afloat. They're controlling games. So now, as we move forward, every decision, from who returns kicks, to who lines up on the interior defensive line, to which rookie steps in and contributes early, it all carries more weight than people might think, because this isn't about rebuilding anymore. This is about refining a team that believes it should be competing at the top. So the real question now becomes this: if all these adjustments actually hit, if special teams become a strength, if the defense gets more consistent, and if the draft delivers impact players right away, are we looking at a Lions team that can finally take that next step and truly dominate their division? And this is exactly where things get even more interesting, because once you accept that this team is focusing on details instead of headlines, you start to look at every position group differently, not just for what it is today, but for what it can become by the time the season really matters. Think about the offensive line situation again. We already saw what happened when key pieces weren't available. Everything changed. The rhythm of the offense, the ability to run the football, even how comfortable Jared Goff looked in the pocket. That unit doesn't just protect, it defines how this entire offense operates. So when there's even a conversation about whether a rookie could step in immediately, or whether a more experienced option like Larry Borom might be the safer choice early on, that's not a small debate. That's a decision that could impact the entire identity of the offense in September, because if that protection holds up, everything else opens. Play action becomes more dangerous. The run game gets back to being physical and consistent, and suddenly explosive players like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams become even harder to defend. But if it doesn't, we've already seen how quickly things can stall. Now bring that back to the draft strategy. There's a very real possibility that the Lions go after a lineman early, not because it's flashy, but because it's necessary. And at the same time, there's also strong value at edge rusher in this class, which creates that classic dilemma. Do you draft for need, or do you take the best player available? That's where Brad Holmes and this front office have quietly earned trust. They've shown that they're willing to stay patient, to avoid forcing picks, and to let the board come to them. And in a draft where there's depth at key positions like edge, that patience could pay off in a big way. Imagine adding a young, explosive pass rusher who can rotate in immediately and grow into a major role. That not only strengthens the defense, it keeps players fresh, it adds versatility, and it gives the coaching staff more options in critical situations. And again, it all ties back to those margins, because what separates teams late in the season isn't just star power, it's depth, execution,